A blacksmith stands before a furnace holding a piece of broken iron. He can spend the rest of the night explaining how it broke. He can name the hammer, the hand, the pressure, the moment of impact, the unfairness of the fracture. Or he can place it in the fire. Most people build shrines around their pain and call the shrine self-understanding. They polish the wound, they narrate it, they defend it. They become fluent in the story of how they were hurt. But pain was never meant to become your biography. It was meant to become heat. There is a belief so deeply embedded in modern consciousness that most people have never once questioned it. The belief says that if you understand your pain well enough, you will heal. That if you find the right words for the wound will close. That explanation is the same as transformation. It is not. Understanding is a map. Transformation is the territory. You can memorize every street on a map and never once leave the room. Knowing the name of the road that broke you is not the same as walking a different one. The culture reinforced this error with great care. It told you to talk about it, to process it, to share it, to find language for it. And there is a place for all of that, a necessary early place. But that place was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a threshold, not a dwelling. What happened instead is that millions of people built homes on that threshold. They moved their furniture there. They hung pictures of the wound on the wall. They invited others to come and witness the wound, to validate it, to acknowledge it, to tell them that yes, the break was real, and yes, the one who broke it was wrong. And still, they did not heal, because the wound was never waiting for a verdict. It was waiting for a fire. Here is the false belief in its most dangerous form. You believe that if you explain your pain clearly enough to the right person, something inside you will finally be released. You believe that the release lives inside the explanation, that it is stored in the telling, that if you can just find the perfect articulation of what happened to you, the weight will lift. But the weight does not live in the story. The weight lives in the energy that was never converted. The pain trapped inside the story is not asking to be understood. It is asking to be used. Raw material does not want to be described. It wants to be shaped. Iron does not ask the blacksmith to understand it. It asks him to heat it, strike it, and decide what it will become. Most people approach pain the way an archaeologist approaches an artifact. They study it, they date it, they document it carefully. They describe its texture and origin, and the artifact remains exactly what it was, unchanged, inert, housed behind glass where it cannot harm anyone and cannot help anyone either. The deeper error is this: when you make pain into an identity, you make powerlessness into a personality. When you organize your selfhood around what was done to you, you grant permanent authority to the one who did it. Every time you tell the story, you reinforce the architecture of that moment. Every retelling is a rebuilding. There is a different law at work in the universe. It says that energy does not disappear. It transforms. The pain you are carrying right now is not waiting to be dissolved through understanding. It is waiting to be converted through direction. It is waiting for you to stop narrating it and start moving it somewhere. The false belief must be dismantled before anything else can be built. The belief that you owe the wound permanent attention. The belief that healing is a passive intellectual process. The belief that the right conversation will finally free you. These are not truths. They are beautiful traps. And the third library does not keep traps in its archive. It keeps keys. This codex is called the Crimson Key. It was given that name because the instrument of transformation in this teaching is forged from something red, from something that carries heat, from the very substance of the pain itself, not despite the pain, through it. What you will receive in this audiobook is not comfort. It is not consolation. It is not a gentle reassurance that everything will be all right. What you will receive is a map. And on that map there are 7 marked territories. Each one is a stage of conversion. Each one takes the raw material of your pain and moves it one step closer to becoming something you can use. The first territory is pain as data. You will learn to read pain the way a navigator reads weather, not as punishment, not as evidence of your unworthiness, but as information, specific, directional, and purposeful information about where your energy has been misdirected, where your boundaries have been eroded, and where your true self has been waiting for permission to emerge. The second territory is pain as fuel. You will learn that emotional pain contains one of the most potent sources of concentrated energy available to a human being. Most people let that energy collapse inward. They let it become depression, resentment, repetition. This codex will show you how to let it move outward instead. The third territory is transmutation itself, the hidden law that governs the conversion of suffering into power. You will understand what transmutation actually is, how it differs from suppression, how it differs from spiritual bypassing, and how it differs from forced positivity. True transmutation is precise. It requires contact with the pain, not avoidance of it. The fourth territory is boundaries. One of the most underutilized outputs of transmuted pain is the clear, firm, uncollapsible boundary. Not a wall built from fear, a gate built from clarity. You will learn how betrayal becomes discernment, how violation becomes sovereignty, and how the wound becomes the exact location where a new rule about yourself was written. The fifth territory is action. The alchemical output of converted pain is not a feeling. It is a movement, a decision, a creation, a word spoken, a door closed, a new path walked. The energy that was locked inside your suffering must eventually enter the world through a specific channel, and you will be shown how to identify that channel. The sixth territory is integration. This is where the pain, now transformed, returns not as a wound, but as wisdom. Not as an open fracture, but as a refined knowing. You carry the memory without being owned by it. You know the terrain without being trapped in it. This is what the archive calls the mature relationship with former pain. The seventh and final territory is the return. The moment when you come back to the wound, not to mourn it, not to reopen it, but to harvest from it, to extract the last remaining intelligence, to acknowledge what it built in you that could not have been built any other way. By the end of this codex, you will understand how to convert betrayal into boundaries, grief into creativity, anger into architecture, humiliation into authority, and disappointment into direction. These are not metaphors. These are mechanisms. They have names. They have sequences. They have signs that tell you when you are doing them correctly, and signs that warn you when you are doing something else instead. This is not a path for those who want to stay comfortable in their explanation. This is a path for those who are ready to enter the fire, not because the fire does not burn, it does, but because what comes out of the fire is no longer broken. If this language feels familiar, if this library feels like a place you have been searching for, subscribe to the third library. There are more codices waiting to be opened. Each one holds a different key. Each one was written for a specific door. Before the protocol can be taught, The law must be understood, not the surface of the law, but its architecture. Because without understanding the law, the protocol becomes mechanical. And a mechanical practice without a living law beneath it is just ritual without power. The law is this: energy does not end, it converts. This is not a spiritual idea borrowed from ancient texts, though the ancient texts speak of it with great precision. It is the fundamental nature of reality as observed at every scale. Nothing disappears. Everything transforms. The fire does not destroy the wood. It converts it into heat, into light, into ash that returns to the earth. The grief does not destroy the love. It converts it into something else, and what it converts into depends entirely on what you do with it. Pain is energy. This is the first and most important understanding in this codex. Pain is not a punishment. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a malfunction of the universe. It is energy that has been triggered by a fracture, an expectation that collapsed, a boundary that was violated, a love that was withheld, a truth that was denied. The energy was already present. The event activated it, but the energy belongs to you. Most people treat pain as though it is something being done to them from outside, as though the grief is an invader, the anger is an intruder, the shame is a foreign object that must be removed. But pain is not outside you. It arises from within you, from the collision between what you expected and what occurred. And because it arises from within you, it is yours to direct. The law of transmutation, as held in the archive of the Third Library, states that every form of emotional pain carries within it a concentrated potential that can be redirected into a corresponding form of power. The specificity matters. The pain is not randomly convertible into anything. It carries a signature. Betrayal carries a specific frequency. Grief carries a different one. Anger, humiliation, envy, disappointment, each of these carries its own signature, and each signature points toward a specific output when transmuted correctly. Betrayal, for example, does not convert into sentimentality. It converts into discernment. The energy that was violated when trust was broken is the same energy that, when redirected, becomes an extraordinarily refined ability to read people, to sense misalignment before it becomes damage, to understand the difference between genuine safety and performed safety. Grief does not convert into detachment. When transmuted, grief becomes depth. It becomes the capacity to love without flinching, to understand loss as a teacher rather than a thief, to move through the world with a weight that is not a burden but a ballast. The people who have grieved deeply and transmuted it carry a specific gravity that others recognize without being able to name it. Anger does not convert into passivity. It converts into architecture. The energy inside anger, when it is not suppressed and not unleashed destructively, becomes the raw force that builds new structures, new rules, new systems, new creative works, new approaches to life that were not available before the anger was felt and moved correctly. Humiliation does not convert into bitterness. When the alchemy is done precisely, humiliation converts into authority. The person who has been publicly diminished and has transmuted that experience does not shrink. They develop a quiet certainty that cannot be threatened by external opinion. They stop performing for approval because they no longer need what approval was substituted for. Envy is perhaps the most misunderstood of all the painful signals. Most people treat it as evidence of their inadequacy, as proof that they are small or spiritually undeveloped. But in the archive, envy is read differently. Envy is a directional signal. It tells you exactly where your own unlived potential is pressing against the boundary of what you have permitted yourself to want. Transmuted envy becomes aspiration with direction. It becomes the compass that points not toward what someone else has, but toward what you have been suppressing in yourself. Disappointment is the pain that arises when a story you were living inside collapsed. The plan did not work. The person did not become who you believed they were. The door that was supposed to open remained sealed. And in the collapse of that story, there is a compressed energy that, if not transmuted, becomes cynicism. But when correctly converted, disappointment becomes calibration. It becomes a refined ability to discern between genuine possibility and projected fantasy. Now comes the deeper layer of the law. The reason that untransmuted pain loops is not because you have failed to understand it. It is because the energy has nowhere to go. When you tell the story again, you reactivate the energy. The body responds, the nervous system charges, the emotional field fills with the original signal. And then nothing happens. The energy is activated and not directed, so it returns to its dormant state, waiting again. This is the loop. This is why the wound can feel as fresh at year 5 as it did at year 1 if the energy has never been moved. The loop is not evidence that you are broken. The loop is evidence that the energy is still present and still seeking a direction. This is the message of the loop. Not that you have failed to heal, but that you have not yet identified the channel through which the energy is waiting to move. Every time you feel the familiar pull of the old pain, you are not regressing. You are receiving a reminder that a conversion is pending. The energy is still in the material. The fire has not yet been applied. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach the moment of pain. Instead of asking why this is happening again, you begin to ask what direction this energy is pointing toward. Instead of dreading the return of the wound, you recognize it as the archive sending a second notice, a third notice, a continuation of the same invitation. The law beneath the event is not cruel. It is precise. It does not punish you for experiencing pain. It simply holds the energy and potential until you learn how to direct it, like water behind a dam. The dam does not destroy the water. It holds it until the gates are opened in the right direction. The gates are what this codex is teaching you to build. The channel is what the protocol is teaching you to identify. The direction is what the transmutation is asking you to choose. There is one more layer of this law that must be named before moving forward. The law does not distinguish between pain that was justified and pain that was not. The universe does not audit the fairness of your wound before allowing the transmutation to proceed. It does not require that the person who hurt you acknowledge the hurt. It does not require a verdict. It does not require justice. It requires only that you take the energy and give it a direction. This is not the same as saying that justice does not matter. It matters enormously. But the transmutation of pain does not wait for justice to arrive. It proceeds independently, because the energy belongs to you, and your freedom does not depend on the confession of whoever held the hammer. The law beneath the event is ancient. It was written into the architecture of consciousness before any text was composed to describe it. Every great teacher in every tradition has gestured toward it. The fire purifies, the storm reveals, the breaking becomes the beginning, not as metaphor, as mechanism. You are not meant to carry the raw iron forever. You are meant to place it in the fire. The misreading begins with a legitimate need. When pain arrives, the first instinct is to reach for language, to describe the experience, to organize the chaos of the emotional impact into something that can be communicated. This instinct is not wrong. It is the beginning of a process that was never meant to stop at the beginning. But for most people, the beginning became the entire journey. The language became the destination. The story became the solution. There is a reason for this. Language offers immediate, tangible relief. When you put words to a wound, the nervous system experiences a measurable reduction in distress. This is real. This happens at a biological level. The act of narrating an experience gives the thinking mind a sense of control over something that felt uncontrollable, and that sense of control registers as relief. The trap is that the relief feels like healing. It mimics the feeling of transformation without producing transformation. This is the central confusion that keeps most people locked inside the explanation loop. The relief of narration is real, but it is temporary. And more dangerously, it can be repeated indefinitely without producing any actual movement in the energy. Rumination is narration without direction. It is the story told again and again in the privacy of the mind, or in conversations that loop back to the same conclusion, or in journals that record the wound with increasing precision but no increasing power. Rumination activates the emotional charge and then releases it back into the same space, unchanged, waiting again. Many people mistake rumination for processing. They believe that because they are thinking deeply about the pain, they are doing the work. But depth of thought about the wound is not the same as movement of the energy in the wound. You can think about the ocean your entire life and never learn to swim. The next misreading is the confusion of validation with transformation. Validation is the experience of being seen in your pain, of having another person acknowledge that what happened to you was real, that the wound was genuine, that the one who caused it was wrong. This too is a legitimate and important human need. But it is not transmutation. When you seek validation repeatedly from the same sources, from friends, from online communities, from partners who are required to hold your wound gently every time it surfaces, you are not moving the energy. You are borrowing a temporary container from someone else to hold it. And when the conversation ends, the energy returns to you, still unconverted. The deeper misreading is the construction of identity around pain. This is where the wound becomes a name, where the experience of betrayal becomes the defining characteristic of a personality, where the grief becomes not a season, but a permanent address, where the identity reads as I am someone who was betrayed, I am someone who lost, I am someone who was not chosen, I am someone who was used. Identity built around pain is not the same as identity built by transmuted pain. The first is a collapse. The second is a construction. The first says, this is what happened to me, and it is what I am. The second says, this happened to me. I moved the energy through it, and what I built from it is now part of who I became. The identity built from untransmuted pain is maintained through constant reference to the wound. It requires that the wound remain visible, remain relevant, remain the centerpiece of the story. And so the story is told again, and the wound is kept fresh, and the energy is kept trapped. Because if the wound healed completely, the identity built around it would need to be rebuilt from something else. And that rebuilding feels like a greater risk than keeping the wound open. The confusion between intensity of emotion and depth of healing is another critical misreading. People equate strong emotion with authentic processing. They believe that if they cry deeply enough, if they feel the anger fully enough, if they sink into the grief with sufficient intensity, the healing is occurring. But emotional intensity without directional output is not transmutation. It is discharge followed by return. True transmutation requires that the energy move from activation to direction, from feeling to channel, from acknowledgement to action. The intensity of the feeling is the raw material, but the intensity alone does not determine what happens next. That is decided by what you do with the energy once it has been activated. The cultural reinforcement of this misreading cannot be underestimated. The dominant cultural script around pain says, feel it, share it, name it, validate it, understand it, trace it to your childhood, trace it to your wounds, build language around it, find community around it, and all of these are real and valuable stages. But nowhere in the dominant cultural script does it say, convert it. The word transmute is almost never used. The concept of using pain as fuel is treated with suspicion, as though it is emotional suppression dressed in productive clothing. And so people stay in the narrative phase indefinitely, believing they are doing the most sophisticated thing, when in fact they are standing at the entrance to the forge and admiring the architecture of the door. One more misreading must be named. Many people believe that to transmute pain means to stop feeling it. They believe that when the archivist says move the energy, it means deny the wound, override the grief, force a smile onto the fracture, and claim that everything is fine. This is not transmutation. This is suppression, and suppression is not alchemy. It is burial. The energy does not disappear. It goes underground, where it becomes something more dangerous. Real transmutation requires contact. You must feel the weight of the iron before you can place it in the fire. The blacksmith does not pretend the iron is not heavy. He holds it. He acknowledges its temperature, its density, its current shape. And then he makes a deliberate choice about what shape it will become. The misreading that costs the most is the one that says you have no power over what the pain becomes, that you are simply its recipient, that the wound was given to you and now it simply is what it is. This is the final error. Because the wound is not the destination, the wound is the starting material. And the starting material has always been in your hands. Begin with betrayal, because betrayal is the wound that arrives with the most concentrated charge. When someone you trusted fully decides to use that trust against you, a specific and violent amount of energy is released. The expectations that were embedded in the relationship, the investment of faith, the softness with which you allowed yourself to be known, all of that folds in on itself and becomes something that demands to be felt. Most people who have experienced deep betrayal describe the same sequence. First, the shock. Then the obsessive replaying of events, searching for the moment the signal was missed. Then the narration. The need to tell the story to anyone who will listen, to have the injury witnessed, to have the verdict confirmed. This is the threshold. This is the beginning. But betrayal does not stop converting energy at the threshold. There is a woman in the archive whose story carries this teaching precisely. She had trusted a business partner with not only capital, but with the creative vision she had spent years building. When the betrayal became visible, she did not miss it. She felt its full weight. She told the story. She was witnessed. And then she felt something shift inside her, not a closing of the wound, but a crystallization, a kind of internal precision she had never experienced before. She could no longer be easily fooled, not because she became closed, but because the betrayal had activated in her a discernment that had always been present, but never fully sharpened. She began to read the texture of conversations differently. She began to notice the gap between what people said and how their energy felt. She began to build structures around her work that could not be accessed without earned trust. The betrayal, fully felt and then directed, became the most sophisticated business intelligence she had ever developed. Now, consider rejection. The pain of rejection is specific in its signature. It is not the same as grief and not the same as betrayal. Rejection carries within it the particular sting of being evaluated and found insufficient, of being seen, at least in your own perception, and then not chosen. This wound attacks identity more directly than most. A young writer once described receiving a rejection that undid him. He had poured 2 years into a manuscript, and the dismissal, when it arrived, was brief. He spent months explaining the rejection to himself and to others, analyzing the gatekeepers, analyzing the market, analyzing the timing. But none of the analysis moved the energy. None of it produced the next manuscript. What finally broke the loop was not understanding the rejection more clearly. It was choosing to use the heat of it. He sat with the specific feeling that the dismissal had activated, the feeling of being overlooked, of being insufficient, and he asked that feeling to point him toward something. And what it pointed to was not a different genre or a different strategy. It pointed to the exact truth he'd been afraid to write in the first place. The rejection had been trying to redirect him all along. The second manuscript, the one born from the converted rejection, found its reader. Anger is perhaps the most misunderstood of the transmutable energies because it arrives without subtlety. It does not whisper, it announces. And the modern cultural relationship with anger is deeply confused, alternating between suppression and destructive release, rarely arriving at the middle path of directed conversion. Consider the anger that arrives after being systematically diminished. After years of being spoken over in rooms where your expertise was undeniable, after being consistently underestimated by structures that benefited from your smallness, after a moment of visibility is stolen with no acknowledgement. This anger is not a disorder. This anger is a bill sent by your own dignity. A man in the archive spent years explaining that anger rather than moving it. He wrote careful analyses of why the anger was justified, why the systems were wrong, why the people who benefited from his diminishment should be held accountable. All of that was true, and all of it left him exactly where he was, until the day he decided to use the heat of the anger to build something instead of describe something. The organization he built from that anger has trained and elevated hundreds of others who would have otherwise remained unseen. The anger became architecture. Grief carries a different lesson, one that resists being hurried. Grief is the pain that insists on its own timing, and any honest codex must acknowledge that. The transmutation of grief is not the same as the transmutation of anger. Anger moves fast. Grief moves slowly, and the channel through which grief converts is not action, but depth. A woman who lost her daughter described a long passage through the darkest corridor any human being can traverse. She did not attempt to convert the grief prematurely. She stayed inside it. She let it take up the space it demanded. But over time, as she moved through that corridor, something extraordinary began to happen in her creative work. The depth of the grief, fully acknowledged and fully inhabited, began to enter everything she made, not as sadness, but as gravity, as an undeniable weight that made her words feel true in a way that they had never felt true before. The grief became the source of everything that gave her work meaning after, not because it resolved, but because it was transmuted through the one channel that grief reliably feeds, the capacity to touch what is most real in other people. Humiliation is the wound that most directly attacks the constructed self. When you are publicly diminished, when your dignity is reduced in front of witnesses, the specific pain that arrives is the collapse of the image you had been carefully maintaining. And in that collapse, a strange opportunity arrives with it. A teacher was publicly undermined in front of students by an administrator who benefited from her small perception of herself. The humiliation was real. The silence that followed it in the room was real. She carried that moment for months, explaining it, feeling the heat of it returning every time she stood in front of a group. But something was happening underneath the explanation loop. The image that had been collapsed in that moment had been an image built partly from the need for approval, and the humiliation in destroying it had paradoxically freed her. When she stopped explaining the humiliation and started asking what it had removed from her that needed removing, she discovered that the need for institutional approval had been limiting the full expression of her authority for years. The humiliation became the event that freed her from a constraint she had not known she was carrying. It became the beginning of a teaching voice that did not ask permission. Envy deserves its own chamber in the archive because it is the one pain that people most reliably misidentify as a character flaw rather than as a signal. The sting of envy, the sharp internal response to witnessing someone else's success, their beauty, their recognition, their freedom, is not a moral failure. It is a compass needle pointing towards something in you that has not yet been given direction. A woman who spent years feeling the particular burn of envy toward a friend who had built a creative business described the moment she stopped treating the feeling as evidence of her inadequacy and started treating it as a map. She asked the envy, specifically and seriously, what it was pointing toward. Not what the friend had, but what in herself the envy was trying to illuminate. The answer that arose was not the friend's business, it was her own withheld creative voice. The envy had been pointing to a silenced part of her for years. When she finally directed that energy toward giving voice to that silenced part, the envy dissolved. Not because she suppressed it, but because the energy had finally arrived at its destination. Disappointment completes this first layer of examples, and it deserves precision. Disappointment is the pain of a collapsed narrative. You had a story about how something was going to go. The story did not hold. And the energy that was invested in that story, the hope, the planning, the emotional anticipation, all of that collapsed inward when the story failed. The person who does not transmute disappointment becomes cautious in a specific way. Not the cautious of wisdom, but the cautious of withholding. They stop investing in stories because every story feels like a potential source of the same collapse. And so they begin to live half measures, half commitments, half open doors. They are managing the risk of disappointment by refusing to go fully toward anything. The transmutation of disappointment does not require that you pretend the story was never worth believing. It requires that you extract from the collapsed story the intelligence it carried. What did the investment reveal about what you genuinely want? What did the failure of that path expose about which path is actually yours? Disappointment, precisely read, does not say stop. It says not that, which is different. Not that points toward something, and something is the beginning of direction. The pattern of untransmuted pain does not announce itself dramatically. It arrives quietly and establishes itself gradually until it becomes so integrated into daily life that it feels like personality rather than pattern. This is the first sign, when what is actually a loop begins to feel like character. You can recognize the pattern in the way certain conversations begin. There's a particular kind of conversation that feels important, that feels like processing, but that always arrives at the same destination. The wound is named. The person who caused it is described. The injustice of what occurred is outlined, and then the conversation ends. And a week later, the same conversation begins again with slightly different words but an identical structure. The loop disguises itself as different conversations because the details shift. The conversation is with a different person, or it revisits a different angle of the same event, or it adds a new piece of evidence to the original case. But the core structure is unchanged. The wound is the subject, the explanation is the activity, and the energy is neither increased nor released. It simply completes another rotation and waits. Watch for the pattern in how you introduce yourself to new relationships, not the formal introduction, but the emotional one. The moment when you begin to let someone new into your interior world. If the first significant content that enters through that door is the wound, if the wound is among the first things you share as a way of establishing intimacy, the pattern is present. This is not a moral failure, it is a signal. It says that the wound has been given the authority to represent you, that the story of what happened to you has been promoted to the position of defining story. That when you reach for something to be known by, the wound is the thing your hand finds first. Notice how the pattern shows up in physical time. The person caught in the explanation loop often cannot account for the hours. They know they were thinking about it. They know the emotion was present. They may have spoken about it or written about it or replayed it internally with such specificity that it felt like reliving the original event. And when the hour or the afternoon or the day is over, nothing in the external world has changed. The energy spent produced no output. The fire burned without forging anything. The pattern is also visible in the relationship with those who listen. There are people in the loop who have, consciously or not, curated an audience for the wound. Friends who have learned their role, which is to receive the story, validate the wound, and confirm the verdict. These listeners are not cruel. They are often deeply loving, but they have become participants in a system that keeps the energy trapped rather than released. When someone in this pattern speaks to a new person who does not immediately validate the wound, who asks a question that disrupts the story rather than confirms it, the discomfort that arises is informative. The resistance to disruption of the narrative is a sign that the narrative has become load-bearing. It is holding something up that would require rebuilding if the narrative were removed. The pattern appears in how the future is imagined. The person inside the explanation loop often imagines the future in terms of the wound, not what they want to build, but what they want to prove, or what they want to recover, or what they want to be given in compensation for what was taken. The future is organized around the wound rather than around a genuine direction. This is not aspiration. This is wound-based orientation, and wound-based orientation, no matter how earnestly it is pursued, cannot produce real movement, because it is aimed at undoing the past rather than building the future. And the past cannot be undone. The energy spent trying to undo it is energy that cannot build what comes next. Physical signals also accompany the pattern. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that belongs to untransmuted pain, and it is different from ordinary tiredness. It is a heaviness that does not lift with sleep, a tension that persists after rest, a low-grade weight that is always present and that intensifies whenever the wound is near the surface. The body is holding the charge. The body always knows before the mind what the mind has not yet decided to do. Notice the relationship with silence. The person in the loop often finds silence uncomfortable when it comes to the wound. In silence, the energy activates without the buffering effect of language. And without language, the raw charge of the pain is felt more directly. This discomfort in silence is not weakness. It is the energy seeking a direction and finding none provided. The pattern shows itself in how time distorts around the wound. Events that happened years ago are described with a present tense precision that suggests they are not past. The details are vivid. The emotional temperature is immediate. This is not evidence of a good memory. This is evidence that the event has not been transmuted, that the energy stored in it is still fully charged because it has never been moved. There is a particular kind of resentment that belongs to this pattern, not the hot resentment of fresh anger, but the cool, constant resentment that becomes a filter through which all new information passes. New betrayals are seen as confirmation of the original betrayal. New disappointments are confirmation of the original disappointment. The resentment has become a lens, and everything viewed through it appears as evidence for the same verdict. This is the pattern beginning to harden. When untransmuted pain becomes a perceptual filter, it begins to generate the very experiences it was born from. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because attention shapes perception, and perception shapes the choices you make and the signals you recognize. You find what you are looking for, and if what you are looking for is evidence of your original wound, the evidence will appear. Notice when growth is resisted not from wisdom, but from wound. When an opportunity arrives and the first response is a version of the original pain. When a new relationship offers genuine safety and something in you finds reasons to not trust it. When a door opens in a direction that was part of the original wound and the instinct is to close it before it can close on you again. This is the wound operating as a navigation system. And a wound is not a navigation system, it is a starting material. The absence of celebration is another marker of the pattern. People who are deeply inside the explanation loop often find it difficult to fully inhabit moments of genuine good. Something keeps pulling attention back. Something inserts a caveat, a reminder, a whisper that the good is temporary or conditional or somehow connected to the wound. The celebration collapses inward before it can complete itself. The pattern stabilizes into what the archive calls victim architecture. Not as an insult, but as a precise description of a structural state. The identity has been organized around the experience of having been acted upon rather than having the power to act. The self that is emerging from inside the pattern is oriented around what was done to it rather than around what it is capable of doing. And a self organized around powerlessness cannot transmute, because transmutation requires the assumption of agency. You have likely recognized the pattern by now, not in an abstract way, but in a specific and personal way. Perhaps in the shape of a conversation you have had too many times. Perhaps in the way your chest tightens when you hear the name of a particular person or moment. Perhaps in the realization that a wound from years ago still has an address inside you, and that address has never been given a different purpose. If you recognize it, write the word iron in the comments, not because you are broken, because you are ready to be placed in the fire, because recognition is not the end. Recognition is the beginning of the work this codex was written to teach. When pain remains untransmuted for long enough, it begins to reveal something that has nothing to do with the person who caused it. This is the layer that most people are not prepared to examine, because examining it requires turning the mirror away from the wound and toward the self that is choosing to remain inside it. The first revelation is this: untransmuted pain reveals attachment to the version of yourself that existed before the wound. Not the wound itself, but the self the wound disrupted. The person you were before the betrayal, before the loss, before the rejection, before the collapse, that self felt known. It had an established identity. And the wound did not only damage the circumstances of your life, it damaged the story you were telling about who you were. The explanation loop is partly an attempt to restore that pre-wound self, to return to the version of the story where you were the person things were happening for, rather than the person they happened to. But that self is not available for return. The wound changed the material permanently. And the grief of that change, the grief not just of what was lost, but of who you were before the loss, is one of the deepest currents running beneath the explanation loop. The second revelation is more confronting. Untransmuted pain reveals a fear of power. This may seem counterintuitive. Why would a person who is suffering from powerlessness be afraid of power? But the fear is not of power in the abstract. It is of the specific kind of power that transmutation produces. When you transmute pain, you become something you were not before. The betrayal that converts into discernment makes you harder to manipulate. The grief that converts into depth makes you more real and more visible. The anger that converts into architecture makes you capable of building things that cannot be dismissed. These are increases in personal power. And personal power comes with responsibility. Responsibility for your choices, responsibility for your direction, responsibility for what you build and what you decide. Staying inside the wound, by contrast, places the responsibility outside you. If you are still in recovery, if the wound is still primary, then the question of what you will do with your life can be deferred. The wound becomes a reason, and reasons in the architecture of avoidance can substitute for action indefinitely. The third revelation is the fear of losing the wound as identity. This one requires the most delicacy because it is the most human of all the fears. When you have lived with a wound for long enough, the wound becomes part of the texture of your selfhood. You know yourself through it. Others know you through it. It has become a familiar presence. And the prospect of transmuting it fully, of arriving on the other side where the wound is no longer the defining feature of your interior world, can feel like a form of death, because in a real sense, it is. The self that was organized around the wound does not survive full transmutation. What emerges on the other side is different, not worse, not diminished, but different enough that the transition requires a willingness to not know who you will be without the wound. And not knowing who you will be is one of the most frightening experiences available to a human being. The fourth revelation is the addiction to being understood. This addiction is subtle because it looks virtuous. It looks like emotional intelligence. It looks like the desire for genuine connection. But when the need to be understood is attached specifically to the wound, when the need requires that the wound be seen and validated before any other connection can be made, it reveals that understanding has become a substitute for something the self believes it cannot generate internally. What it is a substitute for varies from person to person. Sometimes it is safety, sometimes it is worth, sometimes it is the permission to exist in a certain way. But what these have in common is that they are being sought externally, through the wound being witnessed rather than being built internally through the energy the wound was trying to provide. The fifth revelation is about the relationship with responsibility after the wound. Pain, especially pain caused by others, generates a legitimate grievance. The grievance is real. The wrong was real. And there is a human impulse to hold on to the grievance until the debt has been paid, until justice arrives, until the one who caused the wound has acknowledged it, repaid it, or suffered proportionately for it. But this waiting is a form of suspended animation. The person waiting for the external acknowledgement has placed the key to their own liberation in someone else's pocket. And that someone else may never reach into their pocket. The debt may never be paid. The acknowledgement may never arrive. And if the liberation is contingent on its arrival, the liberation will not arrive either. What untransmuted pain reveals here is a belief that your healing belongs to the one who caused the wound, that the pain is theirs to resolve because they created it. This belief is understandable. It is also a trap so complete that only the decision to take back the energy, regardless of the external verdict, can open it. The sixth revelation is about the relationship with the future self. The person inside the explanation loop has often lost the thread of the future self, not in a dramatic way. The future is still imagined, plans are still made, but underneath the plans is a subtle conviction that the future self will still carry this wound, that the wound is permanent, that it will always be this heavy, that the best that can be hoped for is management rather than transformation. This conviction shapes everything. It shapes how much energy is invested in new directions, because if the wound is permanent, why invest fully? It shapes how much risk is taken, because the wound makes risk feel even more costly. It shapes how open the self is allowed to be, because the wound trained the self that openness ends in damage. The seventh and most important revelation is this. When you look at the pattern of untransmuted pain in your own life, and when you look honestly at what it has cost you, what you see is not weakness. You see the shape of a specific power that has been waiting. The pain was always trying to become something. The grief was always trying to produce depth. The anger was always trying to produce structure. The humiliation was always trying to produce sovereignty. The untransmuted pain reveals not what you lack, but what you have been carrying without yet knowing how to use. This is the revelation that changes everything, not the revelation of damage, but the revelation of potential. The wound was never the end of the story. It was always the starting material for the next one. Before the protocol can be applied, the archive requires a clarification. Not every movement away from pain is transmutation. There are several distortions that wear the shape of transmutation while producing something entirely different. The serious student of this codex must be able to distinguish them, because a distortion practiced in place of the real thing will eventually cause more confusion than the original wound. The first distortion is suppression. Suppression is the most common disguise for transmutation and the most damaging. Suppression says, "Move on," in a tone that means do not feel. It says, "Get over it," in a tone that means stop acknowledging the wound exists. It generates the surface appearance of forward movement while pressing the energy underground where it cannot be seen and cannot be directed. The signs of suppression are specific. A person who is suppressed rather than transmuted will experience sudden and disproportionate emotional responses to minor triggers. A small disappointment will collapse into the size of the original wound. A moment of unexpected tenderness will produce an inexplicable grief. An unrelated challenge will carry the full emotional weight of everything that was never processed. This is the underground energy, forcing its way to the surface through whatever cracks it can find. Transmutation requires contact with the material before conversion can occur. You cannot transmute what you have not first acknowledged. The fire cannot work on iron that is buried in the ground. The material must be held, assessed, and then placed deliberately in the heat. Suppression skips the holding, and what is skipped does not disappear. It waits. The second distortion is revenge. Revenge wears the language of transmutation very convincingly. It says, "I'm going to use this pain to make them pay. I'm going to become so successful that they regret what they did. I am going to build something so powerful that the diminishment is reversed in front of witnesses." This sounds like converted energy. It is not. The difference is the target. Transmutation directs energy toward something you are building. Revenge directs energy toward something you are proving to someone else. Transmutation is internally oriented. Revenge is externally oriented. And energy directed toward what someone else sees rather than toward what you are becoming cannot produce genuine power. It produces performance. And performance requires an audience, and audiences are unreliable. And when the audience does not respond as expected, the revenge reveals itself as the wound it never stopped being. The third distortion is spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is perhaps the subtlest distortion because it uses the highest language. It says, "I have already forgiven them." It says, "I understand that this was all part of my spiritual path." It says, "I release this with love and light." These are not false ideas, but they are false when used to avoid contact with the actual emotional material. Forgiveness that arrives before the anger has been felt is not forgiveness. It is avoidance with sacred language. Understanding the spiritual meaning of a wound before the wound has been fully inhabited is not wisdom. It is premature reframing that bypasses the very material that the transmutation requires. Real forgiveness is available only after the full weight of the wound has been held, and the full weight of the wound includes the anger, the grief, the humiliation, the confusion, and the loss. Bypassing them in the name of spiritual elevation is suppression wearing the clothing of enlightenment. The fourth distortion is toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is the cultural reflex that meets pain with immediate reframing. Everything happens for a reason. This is a blessing in disguise. Something better is coming. You are so strong. These phrases are not inherently destructive, but when they are applied to a wound that has not yet been given permission to exist, they function as a kind of emotional silencing. The person who has been told to count their blessings before their wound has been acknowledged learns to distrust their own pain. They learn that the appropriate response to pain is to negate it with gratitude or optimism. And so the wound is driven inward, unacknowledged, where it cannot be transmuted because it has not been permitted to be real. The fifth distortion is manufactured meaning. This is the rush to assign a purpose to the wound before the wound has finished teaching. It says this happened so that I could do this specific thing. This loss was sent to redirect me toward that specific direction. The meaning is installed before it has been earned. Genuine meaning that emerges from transmuted pain arrives on its own timeline. It cannot be forced. When you attempt to manufacture meaning prematurely, you are doing to the wound what the explanation loop does in a different way. You are using the wound as raw material, not for genuine conversion, but for narrative convenience. The meaning becomes a story rather than a discovery. And a story, however inspiring, is not the same as the real intelligence that a fully inhabited and genuinely converted wound eventually produces. The sixth distortion is using pain as a license for destruction. This is the distortion where the energy of the wound is not directed toward building, but toward tearing down, where the anger becomes cruelty, where the humiliation becomes the excuse for humiliating others, where the grief becomes the justification for withdrawal from everyone who remained. This is not transmutation. This is the wound spreading rather than converting. The energy of pain can absolutely be directed outward, but the direction must be constructive. The force of the pain must build rather than dismantle. Anything that produces destruction as its primary output is not an alchemical process. It is the wound in motion, which is different from the wound transformed. The seventh distortion is confusing emotional intensity with transmutation in progress. There are people who believe that if they feel the pain very deeply, very dramatically, very expressively, the transmutation is occurring by virtue of the intensity alone. They weep publicly and call it processing. They rage in long entries and call it alchemy. They descend into profound suffering and call it the work. The feeling of the pain is necessary. The intensity is not the indicator of progress. What indicates transmutation in progress is not how much is felt, but what is moving. Is there a direction appearing? Is there a decision forming? Is there a channel identifying itself through which the energy is beginning to flow? If yes, the work is occurring. If no, the intensity is simply the charge cycling without a circuit. These distortions are not presented to produce doubt or confusion. They are presented because the serious student needs to know what is real from what merely resembles it. The crimson key is a precise instrument. It works only when the material is genuinely understood. And genuine understanding requires this kind of clarity before the practice begins. The Crimson Key Protocol is a 7-stage sequence for converting emotional pain into directed power. It was given its name because the instrument it produces is forged from something red, from something that carries the heat of lived experience. The key is crimson because it was never found. It was made from the exact material that once locked the door. The protocol is not a quick process and not a passive one. It requires honest contact with the material at every stage. It requires a willingness to move through each step without skipping the ones that feel most uncomfortable. The stages that feel most uncomfortable are almost always the ones doing the most essential work. Stage 1 of the Crimson Key Protocol is naming the pain with precision. Not the name of the event, not the name of the person who caused it, the name of the pain itself. This distinction is fundamental. Most people, when asked to name their pain, name the story. They say, "I was betrayed," or "I lost everything," or "I was humiliated." These are names for events. The pain beneath the event has a different name. Ask yourself what the wound actually feels like inside the body. Is it the pain of being invisible? Is it the pain of being disposable? Is it the pain of having believed in something that was not real? Is it the pain of having been denied something you were genuinely owed? Is it the pain of self-betrayal, of having ignored your own knowing in service of someone else's comfort? The precision of the name matters because the name reveals the frequency of the pain. And the frequency of the pain determines what it is capable of becoming. You cannot direct energy, you cannot locate. The name is the location. Take time with stage 1. Do not rush to the name that sounds most spiritual or most socially acceptable. Reach for the name that arrives with a physical response. The name that produces a recognition in the body is the accurate one. That recognition, that slight tightening or opening or weight, is the signal that the correct frequency has been identified. Stage 2 of the Crimson Key Protocol is extracting the message. Every pain carries intelligence. This is the foundational premise of this entire codex. The message is not the story of what happened. The message is the directional information contained within the specific pain you named in Stage 1. The question for Stage 2 is this: what does this particular pain at this particular frequency reveal about what matters most to you? What does it reveal about what you believed, what you expected, what you were trying to protect, what you were trying to become? Pain of invisibility reveals that being seen deeply is a genuine and serious need, not a vanity. The message of that pain is that you must stop operating in spaces and relationships that require your contraction. Pain of disposability reveals that the connection you gave to the person or situation that discarded you was real and valuable. The message is not to give less, but to give it to what can genuinely receive it. Pain of self-betrayal, which is often the most difficult to extract, reveals that there is a knowing inside you that has authority over your choices and that you have been overriding it. The message is that the knowing must be consulted before the choice is made, not after. This message, once extracted, becomes one of the most powerful navigational instruments a person can carry. Stage 3 of the Crimson Key Protocol is locating the trapped energy in the body. The energy of untransmuted pain is not abstract. It has a physical address. Grief sits differently than anger. Humiliation sits differently than disappointment. Each has a texture and a location in the body where it tends to consolidate when it is not given a direction. This stage requires you to sit with the named pain, to feel it rather than think about it, and to locate where in your body the charge is held. This is not a medical process, it is an attentional one. You are simply bringing your awareness to the location of the stored energy so that the energy knows it has been found. This step seems simple and may feel uncomfortable. The discomfort is productive. You are making contact with the material before placing it in the fire, and contact is required. The blacksmith must pick up the iron before he can work with it. Stage 4 of the Crimson Key Protocol is identifying the channel. The channel is the specific form through which the transmuted energy will be directed into the world. Not every pain converts through the same channel. The channel must be matched to the frequency of the pain and to the genuine capacities and circumstances of your life. The question for Stage 4 is this: If this energy were to move outward rather than cycle inward, what form would it most naturally take? Some pain converts most naturally through creative work, through writing, building, composing, designing, making something that did not exist before. Some pain converts most naturally through boundary setting, through the clear and unapologetic naming of what will no longer be permitted. Some pain converts through conversation, but purposeful conversation, one that is aimed at illuminating the teaching rather than seeking validation for the wound. Some pain converts through physical action, through disciplined practice that channels the charge through the body and transforms it in movement. The channel is not chosen by logic alone. The question to ask is not what is the most efficient channel, but which channel makes the energy feel purposeful when you imagine it. When you imagine directing the pain through writing, does something inside you feel a slight recognition of rightness? When you imagine directing it through a specific action or decision, does something shift in the body? That shift is the channel identifying itself. Stage 5 of the Crimson Key Protocol is taking one embodied action through the identified channel. One action, not a plan, not a commitment to eventually act. One specific, embodied, completed action taken through the channel you identified in Stage 4. The embodied action is the moment the energy leaves the field of the wound and enters the world. It does not need to be large, it needs to be real. It needs to be completed. A sentence written and saved, a boundary named aloud or in writing and held, a decision made and not reversed in the following hour, a conversation initiated, a door closed, a creative first gesture made. The reason Stage 5 requires embodied action rather than internal decision is that the energy requires a physical channel to complete its transmutation. A decision held entirely in the mind is a plan. An action completed in the physical world is a conversion. The blacksmith does not decide to shape the iron, he strikes it. Stage 6 of the Crimson Key Protocol is creating a boundary from the clarity of the converted pain. This stage is the one most often skipped, and skipping it allows the same wound to return through the same door. Because without a boundary constructed from the intelligence the pain revealed, the conditions that produced the pain remain available to produce it again. The boundary in Stage 6 is not built from fear. It is not a wall constructed to prevent all future contact with difficulty. It is a gate built from the specific understanding that the transmuted pain produced. If the pain of betrayal revealed that you granted access to your interior world before trust was established, the boundary is the protocol for how trust is established before access is granted. If the pain of being overridden revealed that you did not speak your knowing at the moment it arrived, the boundary is the commitment to voice the knowing in the moment rather than deferring to the comfort of others. The boundary, when it is built from transmuted pain rather than from fear, has a quality that others recognize even without it being stated explicitly. It carries the authority of genuine understanding. It does not require enforcement because it is not made from defensiveness, it is made from clarity, and clarity does not need to defend itself. Stage 7 of the Crimson Key Protocol is returning to the wound only for wisdom. This is the final stage and the most mature. It describes the relationship with the wound after the transmutation has been completed. Not a relationship of avoidance, as though the wound never existed. Not a relationship of repeated return, as though the wound is still primary. A relationship of archived reference. You can return to what you learned from it. You return to extract, not to inhabit. In this stage, the wound has been converted into an archive. It contains usable intelligence about how energy moves, about what you value, about where your power is, about how you recognize genuine safety from performed safety. You can access that archive when the present moment calls for that specific intelligence, and then you close the archive and return to the present. This is the difference between a healed wound and an erased wound. The healed wound leaves something behind, a scar that carries information, a refined knowing that cost something real to develop. The erased wound, if such a thing were possible, would take the wisdom with it. The Crimson Key protocol is not trying to erase the wound. It is trying to convert it into something you can use and then carry in its converted form, not in its raw form, for the rest of your life. The first and most consequential mistake is using pain as a weapon rather than a tool. When the energy of transmuted or partially transmuted pain is directed toward another person with the purpose of making them understand your wound through their own suffering, the alchemy is corrupted at its source. The pain becomes a projectile rather than a resource, and the forge, which was meant to shape something new, becomes an instrument of damage. This happens more often than most people recognize because the wound, when it is charged with anger or with grief, can feel like it is pointing toward another person. The anger says they did this, and it wants to return the experience to its origin. But returning pain to its origin is not transmutation. It is retransmission. And retransmission of pain does not convert the energy. It multiplies it. The second mistake is building a permanent identity from the wound before transmutation is complete. There is a stage in the processing of pain where the wound must be acknowledged as real and as part of your current experience. Saying, "I am in grief right now," or "I am moving through a betrayal," is accurate and appropriate. The mistake is allowing this temporary, accurate statement to harden into a permanent identity claim. "I am a person who is betrayed" is a very different statement from "I am moving through betrayal." One is a season, the other is an address. When the wound becomes the address, the protocol cannot function. Because the protocol is designed to move the energy somewhere else, and if the wound is where you live, moving the energy means leaving home. The third mistake is over-explaining the pain in the name of the protocol. There are people who will engage with the Crimson Key protocol and turn every stage of it into an opportunity for further narration. They will name the pain in great detail. They will extract the message through a long and elaborate analysis. They will locate the energy in the body through an extended meditation they describe at length to anyone who will listen, and they will call this doing the work. But the protocol is designed to move the energy, not to produce a more sophisticated description of it. If stage 1, the naming, is taking more than genuine time to complete, and if completion feels impossible because the name keeps requiring more qualification, the explanation loop has simply relocated inside the protocol rather than being interrupted by it. The fourth mistake is rushing grief specifically. Grief is the one emotional state in this codex that must be treated with particular care, because grief has its own timing, and the timing is not negotiable by the will alone. Attempting to transmute grief before grief is ready to be moved is not a sign of spiritual discipline. It is a sign of discomfort with grief's timeline. Grief does not respond to urgency, it responds to genuine presence. The attempt to rush grief through the 7 stages of the protocol will produce a premature closure that the grief will eventually reopen, often at a time and in a context that feels deeply inconvenient. Let grief inhabit its season. The transmutation of grief comes when grief itself is ready. And the sign that grief is ready is a shift from the interior pressure of the wound toward a quiet openness to what comes next. That shift cannot be forced. It can only be waited for with honesty. The fifth mistake is confusing emotional intensity during the protocol with evidence that the protocol is working correctly. The crimson key. Protocol, when applied to genuine material, will produce emotional activation. Contact with the wound produces charge. This is expected and it is appropriate, but the charge is not the measure of the progress. A fire that burns very dramatically is not necessarily forging anything. The measure of progress in the protocol is the presence of direction. At each stage, ask whether something is clarifying, whether a channel is emerging, whether a decision is forming, whether an action is becoming possible. If yes, the protocol is working. If the only output is increased emotional intensity without any corresponding directional clarity, something in the process is cycling rather than converting. The sixth mistake is performing the protocol for an audience, the crimson key. Protocol is interior work that may produce exterior outputs. The boundary, the creative work, the embodied action of stage 5, these are real and visible. But the process itself is not designed for performance. When the protocol is done in front of others, either literally or through the narration of every stage as it occurs, it becomes subject to the distorting influence of the audience's response. If the audience responds with validation, the validation can substitute for genuine progress. If the audience responds with skepticism, the skepticism can interrupt the process before the stage is complete. The protocol works most precisely in the interior, in silence, or in writing that is not immediately shared. The seventh mistake is treating the protocol as a single-use instrument. The Crimson Key protocol is a repeated practice. It is not something done once during the most dramatic wound of your life and then retired. Pain arrives in many forms across a lifetime. Each new form of pain contains new energy that requires a new application of the 7 stages. The protocol is a permanent instrument in the archive of your own self-governance. It becomes more precise and more efficient with practice because you become more familiar with the signatures of your own pain, more skilled at identifying the channel quickly, more practiced at taking the embodied action without delay. The 8th mistake is expecting the transmutation to eliminate all future vulnerability to the wound's origin. If betrayal has been transmuted, the resulting discernment does not make you immune to all future betrayal. It makes you less likely to miss the signals that precede it. If grief has been transmuted into depth, it does not mean you will never grieve again. It means that the next grief will be navigated with the intelligence that the previous one produced. The purpose of transmutation is not invulnerability. The purpose is increased capacity, the capacity to feel without being destroyed, to recognize without being paralyzed, to act from understanding rather than from the raw charge of the unprocessed wound. The Crimson Key protocol applied to the surface pains of daily life is already a profound instrument, but the archive holds a deeper application of this teaching, and it is in the deeper application that the protocol reveals its full range. In the domain of creative work, transmuted pain is the most reliable source of authentic material that a creative person has access to. Not the description of pain, but the energy of it, directed through the act of making. The sentence that carries genuine weight was written from something real. The painting that stops a viewer in their tracks was made from something felt. The musical phrase that produces an unaccountable grief in the listener was composed from a grief that was inhabited and then given form. The mistake most creative people make is attempting to create from the description of their pain rather than from its energy. They write about what happened rather than through what happened. The about creates distance. The through creates transmission. The Crimson Key, applied to creative work, asks not what can I make about this wound, but what can this wound make through me when I stop managing it and start moving it? In the domain of business and professional life, transmuted pain becomes one of the most powerful competitive advantages a person can carry, not as a performance of their suffering, but as the specific intelligence that the suffering produced. The entrepreneur who has experienced the particular pain of being exploited in a professional relationship carries, if the pain has been transmuted, an extraordinarily refined ability to structure fair agreements, to identify misalignment before it becomes damage, to build organizations based on the specific understanding of what violation produces. The person who has experienced the pain of being perpetually overlooked in institutional structures and who has transmuted that pain carries an unusual sensitivity to the experiences of others who are being overlooked. This sensitivity, applied to leadership or to the design of systems and cultures, produces something that a person who has never experienced that pain cannot manufacture. The wound, in this context, is not a liability. It is a specific expertise that costs something real to develop and that cannot be learned any other way. In the domain of relationships, the Crimson Key has its most intimate application. The boundaries built from transmuted pain, as discussed in Stage 6 of the protocol, reshape the architecture of every relationship the transmuted person enters, not through defensiveness, but through clarity. The person who has transmuted the pain of chronic self-abandonment in relationships does not enter new relationships with the same patterns. They carry a new inner architecture that is simply incompatible with the old dynamic. This does not mean that intimacy becomes easier in the sense of being less vulnerable. The transmuted person is often more capable of genuine intimacy, not less, because they are no longer using the relationship as a substitute for the internal work. They are bringing a self that has been shaped by its pain rather than hidden behind it. And a self that has been shaped by its pain can be met in a way that a self hidden behind it cannot. In the domain of spiritual timing, the transmutation of pain produces an unusual relationship with the experience of waiting. The person who has not transmuted their pain experiences, waiting as an extension of the wound. The delay feels like further evidence of what the wound was trying to prove. The spiritual student who has applied the Crimson Key to their experience of waiting begins to read the delay differently, not as punishment, but as the forge still running, as evidence that the material is still being shaped, as an invitation to continue the protocol rather than to interrupt it with demands. In the domain of physical energy, untransmuted pain has a measurable cost that is often not recognized as such. The body holds what the mind has not processed. This is not a metaphor. The physical tension, the chronic low-grade fatigue, the patterns of contraction that live in the shoulders, the chest, the jaw, these are physical expressions of energy that has been activated and not directed. The application of the Crimson Key at the physical level, the contact with the body that Stage 3 requires, is not incidental to the protocol. It is the protocol at the level where the energy is actually stored. When the transmutation begins to move the energy through a genuine channel, the body often experiences a shift before the mind has fully articulated the change. A lightness, a restoration of breath, a release in a specific location that had been holding tension for months or years. These physical signals are not imagined. They are the body reporting that the energy has begun to move. In the domain of long-term integration, the Crimson Key produces what the archive calls a refined autobiography, not a story of what happened to you, but a living architecture built from what you did with what happened to you. The person who has applied this protocol across multiple wounds across years of living carries a self that is layered with converted experience. Each transmuted pain has added a specific quality: discernment from betrayal, depth from grief, structure from anger, sovereignty from humiliation, direction from disappointment. The refined autobiography is not a performance of resilience. It is not a claim that the wounds were not real or that the pain was not significant. It is the evidence, visible in the quality of the choices made, the relationships entered, the creative works produced, and the authority with which the self moves through the world, that the material of a life has been genuinely used rather than endlessly explained. Return now to the beginning, to the forge, to the furnace burning in the dark, to the blacksmith standing before it, holding a piece of broken iron. He did not spend the night explaining the fracture. He did not name the hammer or the hand or the precise angle of the impact that broke it. He looked at what was in his hands. He acknowledged its weight. He acknowledged its current shape, the jagged edge of the break, the rough surface of the damage. And then he made a decision that only he could make. He placed it in the fire. The iron did not understand the fire. It did not consent to be heated. It did not narrate its resistance to the temperature. It simply received the heat, and the heat did what heat does when it is applied to genuine material by someone who knows what they want to make. By the end of this process, the blacksmith was not holding broken iron anymore. He was holding a key, not despite the fracture, because of it. The break had created an edge. The edge had taken the shape of the fire's work. The work had produced something that could open a door that had never been opened before. This is what was always true about your pain. It was never a story to be completed. It was never a wound to be permanently tended. It was never a biography to be refined into the most accurate and moving version of itself. It was material. It was energy. It was potential waiting for the decision of the forge. The Crimson Key is not given to you. It is made by you. From the exact material that once held you in place, from the grief that became depth, from the anger that became structure, from the betrayal that became discernment, from the humiliation that became authority, from the disappointment that became direction. The key was always there, inside the wound, waiting not for the wound to be explained, but for the fire to be applied. You have been inside this codex long enough now to understand what is being asked of you. Not comfort, not consolation, not the promise that the pain will simply end if you wait. The codex asks something more precise and more demanding. It asks you to stop explaining the fracture and start deciding what the metal will become. If this codex found you at the right time, if the language of the third library feels like a tongue your interior has always spoken but never heard spoken aloud, keep it close. Return to it when the signs become difficult to read. Return to it when the wound feels like it is narrating itself again. Return to it at the beginning of the 7 stages, and each time you return, bring the newest material. Because the forge does not close, and the work does not end. It simply becomes more refined, more precise, and more powerful with every fire you are willing to enter.